Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of the emergence of Christianity in the Roman Empire. I want to talk about some early Christian institutions. We're going to talk about the cult of the saints, martyrdom, icons, and asceticism. First, though, just as a preliminary, I want you to consider a couple things. One, Christianity emerges here in the first century of the Common Era with the Roman Empire at its height. Are the Christians, they're in the Roman Empire, or are they of the Roman Empire? Can you be both Christian and Roman? Rome, of course, is a polytheistic empire, and Christianity, of course, is a monotheistic religion. Another question I'm just going to raise here at the beginning before I get into these institutions is this notion of persecution. Here in the United States, we grow up in Sunday school or church, and you see depictions of Christians being fed to the lions in these stadiums, coliseums. What is this about? It's worth considering for just a moment why the Christians were persecuted by the Romans. I want to emphasize that the Romans are a polytheistic people. They could care less what the Christians worship or what they believe. The problem with the Christians is that they set themselves aside. They sort of excluded themselves from participation in Roman civic life. Roman citizens are expected to pay homage to the Roman gods. They can also pay homage to their own gods, whatever they might be. But you're expected to participate in this sort of civic duty as a Roman citizen, and Christians quite often did not. This may sound trivial, but consider if you're let's say you're at a baseball game, and just before the first pitch, you have the playing of the national anthem. And everybody rises and takes off their hats and puts their right hand over their heart and turns toward the flag. Now, let's say you're doing this at a Braves game, and there are three guys in front of you in the seats directly in front of you. They have their hats on during the playing of the national anthem. In fact, they turn them around backward. They're drinking beer. They don't stand. They continue to chatter away and laugh. There's an excellent opportunity here for a fight, for people to be offended that these three guys are not paying the proper civic respect. This is analogous to what's going on in the Roman Empire with the Christians. They appear to be deliberately and provocatively ignoring their civic responsibilities. And this accounts for some of the Roman hatred and persecution of Christians. Now, the cult of the saints. This is the first of these early institutions. Certain Christians exhibited extreme piety, great devoutness, and this led people to believe that they were perhaps closer to God. Here you can think of the saints themselves, and you know that there are cults surrounding the various saints. I know in Latin America, the cult of Mary, the Virgin Mary, is very powerful. The cult of the saints. This allows Christianity to spread throughout the Roman Empire as local saints are venerated for their piety. And more people adhere to these saints, the worship of them, and the maintaining of this cult. These especially devout people demonstrate what we call imitatio Christi, Latin for living and, if necessary, dying in the way of the Lord. You can see that we'll print this for you so you can see it quite plainly. Imitatio Christi, imitating Christ. There emerges in the empire value placed on the relics of saints, a lock of hair, a femur, clothing that might have been worn by a saint. All of you have heard of the Shroud of Turin, supposedly the burial cloth of Jesus. I think it's been demonstrated to be a forgery at this point. But nevertheless, you can see the importance attached to relics. Churches, noblemen, if they could, would collect relics for their power. And of course, churches collect relics also to draw parishioners into their church. In fact, I read a book one time some years ago that described the emergence of a sort of a early tourist trade based on Christian pilgrimages. Pilgrimage, of course, is a religious journey. These pilgrimages that Christians would take to particular churches because the church claimed to have some relic of special importance. I read once some historian made the amusing comment that every church in Christendom claimed to have a piece of the cross upon which Jesus was crucified. Why would churches make such an absurd claim? Well, it's simple, to draw parishioners to the church. So you have people traveling on traditional routes to reach these especially devout and venerated places. This strengthens the faith and allows Christianity to spread across the Mediterranean basin. Miracles of the saints. Of course, the saints are venerated for having the supernatural power quite often. As historians, we can't prove or disprove this. This is not something we can approach in that fashion. What we can do is look at the belief in the miracles by those contemporaries of the saints. They believe it. Why? Why do they believe it? That's something that a historian can get at. We can't get at the notion of proving or disproving miracles. And remember, I've already said this, but it bears repeating, the Roman culture is a polytheistic culture where worship of Christian saints is perfectly accepted, assuming that you do your civic duty as well and pay homage to the pantheon of Roman gods. The second institution I'm going to mention is martyrdom. Christians quite often choose martyrdom over recantation, or not only of recantation, that is disavowing their beliefs, but of performing that civic homage to the Roman gods. Martyrdom is interesting because the Christian here is essentially making a bargain of avoiding eternal damnation in hell for a few minutes of agony here on earth. So let's say a Christian martyr is going to be burned at the stake. As the fire approaches you, or as you approach the stake, why not recant? Why not disavow your beliefs and tell the Roman authorities what they want to hear? It's believed by these especially devout Christians that such a disavowal will mean eternity, eternal damnation. So martyrs will begin to flourish here in the first, second, and third centuries of the Roman Empire. I think it's key here to recognize that the martyrs have agency. They can choose to live by disavowing their beliefs, or they can choose to die by maintaining their beliefs in contradiction of the Roman authorities. Martyrs are often executed in public. This, of course, is a deterrent to dissuade other people from following the same path. One of the early church fathers, I forget which one, said something to the effect that the blood of the martyrs are like the seeds of the church. That is, the audience views Christian martyrdom and is intrigued that a person could have such devout faith and may begin to investigate Christianity to see why these people, their faith is so strong. So martyrdom is also obviously a way that the faith is spread throughout the Roman Empire. The next institution I'm going to mention are icons. Icons are representations of the holy. We have arguments pro and con, and I'm just going to briefly mention this. The traditional argument for icons is that, and you see this in the Western Church especially, the Catholic Church, is that the parishioners are probably illiterate, and the icons, the stained glass, the images, the statues of the saints, of Christ, of the Passion, all these things, that these icons educate an illiterate audience. The argument continues and says that these icons are beautiful and it draws people to the church. And of course the church wants the tithing of the parishioners as well. So the icons help to educate the parishioners, and the icons draw people to the church. Now, this is not, and as you go further east, you'll see that there's disagreement. And you see in the Protestant churches later, after the Reformation, there's controversy here. The argument against icons is simple. The icons are distracting you from your true purpose, imitatio Christi, or the worship of God. You're too distracted by the beautiful stained glass, the statues, the crucifixes, etc., etc. And your focus should be on God, not on these representations of the holy. We'll pick this up again when we get to the Reformation. And then finally, I just want to say a couple of words here about another early Christian institution, the rise of asceticism. You've probably seen monks who live in caves. There's a famous monk that lived at the top of a column. They deprived themselves of things that we take for granted, food and pleasure, material pleasure. You see monks practicing solitude, silence, fasting, continuous prayer, vows of celibacy, the denial of sex, simplicity. Essentially here what you have is a denial of the material world so that your proper focus is on God and the worship of God. The purpose of this, of course, is to separate oneself from the material world, which is often viewed dualistically, the material world being evil, the spiritual world being virtuous. And monks and ascetics tend to take this idea of dualism to its furthest extent. So those are four early institutions of Christianity. They demonstrate great diversity in the faith. They demonstrate how it can be spread and the various ways that it manifests itself in the Roman Empire. Thank you for your attention.